Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, PowerToFly. Thank you to all of the amazing women and other leaders who have joined us this week for such a powerful and important conversation. Time has found us to have the conversation that we're having today, not only how we elevate and continue to celebrate the achievements of Black women and the amazing impact that they've had in this world, but we also want to have, as I have said, as I've taken this stage before, that kitchen conversation, that kitchen table conversation that my friends tell me in the South, that when you want to have an adult and serious conversation, have it around the kitchen table. And so I welcome you back to the kitchen table. I'm excited to be here with my friend, an extraordinary leader, Charlene Wheeless. How appropriate, Wheeless, like when the wheels fall off, right? Because that's how you've been in your extraordinary career, making sure that you are driving with impact. And of course, that's what we do together, Charlene, at APCO Worldwide, which I'll just say, extraordinary leaders from all walks of life, founded 38 years ago by Marjorie Krause, who works 3 times as hard as the rest of us at the helm of APCO. We are a independent, woman-founded, woman-led, employee-owned company, and gender equity, equality, diversity, equity, all of what we're talking about today is at the DNA of who we are and the work we do. So we are proud to be at this table. Charlene, I know you are a big fan, like I am, of Maya Angelou. I had the privilege some 30 years ago to meet her and hear a speech in which she said, among other things, she talked about her mission in life being not merely to survive, but to thrive, but to do that with some passion, with some compassion, with some humor, and with some style. When I think about that, I think about you and the conversation that we're going to have today. And so I'm excited to be here with you and jump right in. And we will, as Catherine mentioned, talk about your book, You Are Enough. And that's an underscore with an exclamation point for those listening out there. You are, in fact, enough. So let's talk about your career, Charlene. You have served in several C-suite positions throughout your life. I want to talk a little bit about that for our audience, and I want to encourage our audience to use the chat feature to ask questions. We're going to try to get to as many of those as we can. Charlene, you've had a lot of you've been at this for a long time, a long journey in the C-suite, breaking, if you will, destroying that glass ceiling, so to speak. We have a lot of people in the audience who are on that same mission and are attempting to destroy that glass ceiling. The question, though, is what happens when you actually go through and you break that glass ceiling and you realize you've hit a concrete wall, a wall that you can't see through and see around. Tell us about your experience when you've broke through that glass ceiling, hit the concrete wall. How did you handle it?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Licy, and for PowerToFly, and to the audience. I'm so happy to be here and to be having this conversation with someone who I think very highly of, Licy. So it's great to see you. You know, what happens when you shatter the glass ceiling and you hit the concrete wall? You get a really big headache. That's the first thing that happens. And, you know, the concrete wall and the brick wall is something that is very much unique to Black women and to women of color. And what it refers to is, you know, when there's glass, you can see through glass, you can see around it, you know that there is more out there for you. For Black women, when we hit the wall, when we hit that concrete wall, it's impenetrable. You can't see through it, you can't see around it, and you don't know if there's more for you or not. And, you know, that's one of the reasons I think why it's so important to have Black female executive leaders who are looking out for all of us. So I'm looking out for the people who come behind me so that I can tell you that, yes, there is more. I'm not going to keep the corporate secret, right? I'm going to show you that there is more, and I'm going to help you figure out how to get around that concrete wall, because you'll never go through it. That's just not, it shouldn't even be a goal. But we can go around it with the help of other people, with a lot of perseverance and a lot of resilience. And I think one thing that has defined me in my career is when I hear the word no, that is like throwing down the gauntlet for me, right? It's like, you tell me no, and I'm going to prove to you that no does not exist. And so, I've learned some hard lessons that way, but it's also been a way to move through the world that has made sense for me and in my career.
Indeed. I want to talk about some of those lessons. So how do you emerge in breaking that glass ceiling, hitting the wall, and do so with not so many bruises and scrapes, if you will, professionally along the way? What advice would you give to those today who are in that situation where they think,
Mhm.
I've just broke through this glass ceiling, now I'm on my way, and then I stand in front of a brick wall? As a Black man of color, I can empathize to some extent with that too. I've hit a lot of walls in my own career, only, as you said, to not stop and continue to find ways through. But how do you do that with not so many professional bruises or scrapes, or is that just
Mhm.
part of that process?
Well, I can speak for my own personal experience that it absolutely is part of the process. And you have to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and go back for another day. As a Black woman, and one of the first, not one of, but the first person in my family to go to college. I grew up in an environment where I knew that the world was not going to be fair for me. And quite frankly, just a little aside, I learned this when I was in seventh grade, and I tried out for cheerleader of all things. And I knew I was good. At least my 11-year-old self felt that she was good. And I didn't make the team. I made it as the fourth alternate. And so, do you know how bad you have to be to make it as the fourth alternate? And I was disappointed, but the sponsor was also my math teacher that year. And very long story short, within a couple of months, I was put on the team ahead of the other alternates. And I asked my sponsor, the cheerleading sponsor, why she put me ahead of everyone else. And she said to me, Charlene, you're Black, and we thought you'd be a troublemaker, so we didn't want to put you on the team. But now that I've had you in class, I see that you're a nice little girl, right? And two things were really wrong with that. Well, more than two things, but one was that she felt the freedom to say that, right? And the second piece was that I understood, right? Because I had already been taught that my Blackness would be an issue in the world, not just in life. And so I made a decision, maybe not then and there, but a few years later, that I was not going to let someone else tell me who and what I could or couldn't be. And that is what really has served me well as I've gone through and hit the brick wall, right? And I've said, okay, I'm going to put on my big girl pants and I'm going to try another route, but I'm not going to just stop and not do this because you who don't know me are telling me that I can't do it. And that's the thing with, I think with Black women is we are constantly being told and it being reinforced that we're not enough, right? Well, enough of what? Right. If you ask my husband, he'll tell you I'm more than enough. so, you know, um, so I think we just have to realize that as Black women, we have to be fearless. We have to be resilient. We have to be tenacious, and we have to know that we can persevere.
Incredible story, and one that I think all of us can relate to in terms of being told what we're not, only then to be told what we can and cannot do,
Mhm.
right? And it reminds me of what Angela Bassett, the
Mhm.
extraordinary actress,
Right.
she is. She said, "Don't ever settle for average," right? She said, "Bring yourself, bring the best of
Mhm.
you to the moment, because we need," as she said, "to live in the best that's in us," right? And as
Absolutely.
you said, we are living as Black professionals, a woman and men, in being the very best that's in us, not what others are telling us we can be, but what we know be and know who we are and our value. That is, as Maya said, Maya Angelou, not just to survive, but to thrive. You talked about having people, if you will, helping you along the way. I know having a professional support system is so important. That system of mentors and advocates who can help guide you, as well as someone who can help give you the advice and be that cheerleader. We've talked about this difference between a mentor and a cheerleader. For our audience here, thinking about this and thinking about the mentors and the cheerleaders in their lives today in a professional sense, how do you describe what the difference is between a mentor and a cheerleader, and the importance of having both at different points in your career?
Sure, sure. So I tend to view it as, a mentor is someone that is going to help you acclimate to the climate or the environment that you're in. They're going to show you where the landmines are, right? And they're going to tell you the way to get things done and not to get things done. Mentors are to help you feel comfortable in your new organization or your situation that you're in. Champions are the people who get you that next job. Your champion or your cheerleader, that's the person in the room that you're not allowed into. And that's the person who is advocating for you when perhaps no one else is doing that. And I really encourage people to don't just have one champion, have an army of advocates for yourself, because you're going to need it, or else you do get overlooked. And that's not to say that mentors aren't important, because I think they are hugely important and very helpful. And I personally love to mentor young men and women. So mentors are important. But if you're going to move ahead, if you're going to get that promotion and that next job and that next job, you need a champion, because you need someone who's in that room saying, hey, are we overlooking Charlene? Or if the reason we are overlooking her is X, let's talk about that and see what that's about. Yesterday evening, afternoon in the session, there was a lot of talk about the difference between coming across as being angry and having passion, right? Well, sometimes you need the champion in the room to say, she's not angry at all. She probably cares about this more than anybody else in this room. Don't mistake passion for anger. But we need people to be able to be those advocates for us, because there are still rooms we're not allowed in.
Indeed. And I want to, on that note, continue to encourage our audience to submit questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from you and get your thoughts and ask and answer your questions. Don't confuse passion for anger. You've been on this journey for 25, 30 years. I'm certain, like you, like me, if we're around this kitchen table, as we're talking, having an unapologetic conversation, tell us of a time or times where people confuse that in you, and how you address that.
Well, I think that people confuse that with Black women all the time, right? We are not given the luxury to be angry, and most of the time we aren't anyway. We're not going to go into the workplace, upset. Now, I learned a long time ago that there were certain things that weren't afforded to us, and one of them is anger. And so that's not anymore my nature. I don't get angry, and I can count on two hands the number of times in my life that I've raised my voice. Now, to be completely frank, I didn't learn to not be angry because of work. I learned to not be angry because I grew up with an alcoholic, abusive father. And so loud voices and anger to me meant that there was violence to follow. So I'm a little bit different in that I really pride myself on not raising my voice and not getting angry. That doesn't mean, or not showing anger, that doesn't mean that I don't get hurt and I don't get, quite frankly, just flat out pissed off at times. But I also know that that showing that is not going to serve my purpose, right? And so there's no reason for me to get angry. And when I've been in the workplace, and I think many Black women have had this, and you express opinion and someone says, calm down, you know, I call them on it. It's like, what about you makes you think that I'm not calm? Because I expressed an opinion. And, as much as I think people need advocates and believe that people need advocates, people also need to understand the importance of advocating for themselves as well. And I just got to a point, Licy, where I was so tired of being told who I am and what I could be and couldn't be. And, don't be so forceful, be less forceful, be more aggressive. No, be assertive. I just got so tired of that. I just said, you know what? This is me, right? Take it or leave it. This is me. I'm going to work within the system, but I'm not going to become the system.
Indeed, not to become the system, and to not be misunderstood in how you engage within that system, in that workplace, if you will. Early on in my career, I recall confronting a very difficult situation where I had to help work and guide other staff in what was a challenging situation. And while others were reacting in ways that I thought behaviorally were not very helpful, I took a more balanced and even keel approach. And I recall being in a meeting with my boss and others, and I had the individual say, Licy's not as concerned, or he's not as engaged in all of this, and they were deriving that because of how I was reacting.
Right.
And I said, don't mistake my calmness for a lack of sentiment and engagement in this work. You can bring yourself to the work without having to do that in ways that take away from the impact that you're trying to bring.
Right. That's so interesting, Licy, that you said that, because I had the same experience, because I tend to be calm, which is one of the things I think characteristics is what makes me good at my job. But I also realized that as I became an executive, and there are people around me who would get worked up over things. And because I didn't get worked up, the assumption was that I didn't care, right? That I must not be as invested. And I had a champion in the company who said to me, I was going into a meeting with the board, a presentation to the board, and he said to me, I want you to start your presentation by explaining that the harder things are and the worse they get and the more risk and crisis we have, the calmer you become. And that's how that's how they can know that you have things under control. And that was a brilliant piece of advice, because I would have never quite understood why they didn't think I was serious about some things. And so we talk about champions. Champions are the ones who are going to tell you that, because that champion was in that room. And he heard the conversations about, oh, I'm not sure Charlene cares. Do you see how calm she is about this? So it's just interesting that that you mentioned that, and we had that same experience. But it's just a great example of how a champion and an advocate can be helpful in a way that you wouldn't even think about.
Completely agree. We have questions coming in. Thank you for those who have been submitting, and continue to encourage you to submit them. Charlene, there's a question from Nicole Nichols who asks, how do you find a champion? What should you look for, because you don't want to choose the wrong champion? Let me open up the question a bit more. What do you see as 2 or 3 attributes for a mentor and for a champion? And
Well,
how do you find, as others are asking, how do you find these leaders, these individuals in your life?
So I tend to think that mentorship is best when it's organic. And I know a lot of companies have programs, and I hope those programs are successful that connect people. But I find it's when you start developing relationships with people, or maybe it's even someone that you admire. I've had people hit me up on LinkedIn and say, "Hey, I've been following you for a couple of years. I would love for you to be my mentor." And my first question back to them, my first response, of course, is thank you. But my other question, and it's an important one, is what do you want from me as your mentor? What is it that I'm helping you with? And so when mentees are looking for a mentor, I always advise them to know in advance what it is that you're looking for from that person, because chances are the mentor is busy but wants to help and wants to give you the help that you need. But you can't do that if you're just kind of all over the place. So I think organically, and I think the same thing when looking for a champion within your company, that it's about building the relationships. It's about cultivating a relationship with someone that you feel comfortable with, that can feel comfortable with you, and it takes time. And champions come from all over the place. I've had champions in the industry who I haven't worked with, and also champions of people who I have worked with. But it's very much it's about relationships. Find people who have characteristics that you really admire. That you want to know how to be that way, and develop a relationship with them. And it doesn't have to start out by saying, "Hey, would you be my champion?" It's just having a conversation and then remembering some of the things you said with them. I spent years ripping out pages or articles in magazines and scanning them and sending them to people and saying, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me, but we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago and you mentioned X, and I came across this article and thought you might be interested." Right. So it's doing things for people without expecting something in return. And you would be surprised, because most everyone I know who has been a champion has really enjoyed the experience and seen it as an honor. But I'll also add that champions use their credibility to elevate others. So if you're not going to do the work, and if you're not someone who is really looking to position for excellence, chances are a champion is not going to come your way, because a champion is going to use his or her credibility to help advance you.
Wonderfully and eloquently said. It is very similar, if not identical, to how I've thought about mentorship and championing others. It reminds me of a proverb, an old African proverb that I often quote, which is, "I am because we are because I am."
Mhm.
You, Charlene, myself, we are examples of all the others that have come and along our journey
Mhm.
to help us, to lift us up in moments that we did not know and in moments that we did know, and to help us along the way, sometimes in mentorship, sometimes in being a champion. Oftentimes you don't know that you are a mentor or you are a
Right.
champion for that
Mhm.
person. And it's important when you're thinking about assembling this these advisors in your life to
Mhm.
not think about it as, I need to go out and find a mentor, I need to go out and find a champion.
Mhm.
But you're forming, just as you are in your personal life, trust relationships with those that you are wanting to seek their wisdom and their grace.
Mhm.
And champions and mentors can come from any part of
Absolutely.
your life and your career. And I think establishing that conversation, sharing with others your experience, and asking questions about how they dealt with some of the difficult
Mhm.
questions or challenges or opportunities in their career, that begins to lay the groundwork for mentorship and eventually being a champion. And so I know there are a lot of questions from
Mhm.
sort of how to navigate that, and it's important that that we who are in positions so much because of all of the champions and mentors along the way, that we're always reaching out, as I know you do, Charlene, and I, to help those, especially communities that are disadvantaged, and communities of color, to lift them up, get them over that concrete wall that we talked
Absolutely.
about a few minutes ago, and to help be that advocate and champion.
Mhm.
It's also important to have companies that have established programs like here at APCO with us,
Mhm.
that have programs that connect mentors, connect champions, and
Mhm.
also create opportunities for, like I have in managing an office with many hundreds, an open door policy where anyone can come knock on my virtual door these days, with whatever question and whatever they want to talk about. So as leaders, it's important to communicate the want and desire to try to be as helpful as you can to those who are at any point in their journey. So Charlene, I want to now transition to those who may not have a mentor or champion to support them in their journey. Sort of, how do you handle in those cases where you don't
Mhm.
have that support system? How do you handle being the only woman of color as you are climbing in your career?
Ah.
You and I have faced this question throughout the better part of our 3 decades plus careers of being the only one. That comes with a special set of circumstances, if you will, and a bullseye on top of it. How did you
Mhm.
experience that journey of being the only one at times in your career?
Well, let me start by just acknowledging, and everybody who's been an only knows this, it's hard and it's lonely. And, you become the voice of the race for people who don't know better. And so it is also a huge responsibility. And, in one of my first really big executive jobs, I had been there for a couple of weeks and a young woman came in to see me. And I didn't know her, and she wanted to introduce herself to me, and and she said a couple of things that I've carried with me my entire career. One was that she said, you're the first woman to work at this company that wears heels to work. And I thought, well, I look good in heels. Why wouldn't I wear heels? Right. And she said, well, now we all wear heels because we think it's okay. She said, and the other is, we're so glad you're here because if you're here, then that means that there's hope and there's possibility for the rest of us. So from that point on, for me, being an only became a mission and a purpose because if there can be one, there can be two and three and four. So it stopped being about me and how uncomfortable I am. And maybe I'm tired of breaking barriers and doing all of these different things. But if I could be the person that helped pave the way, that made it okay for people to come behind me, then that was a responsibility that I was more than happy to take, and I know you've done the same thing in your career, Licy, and I think we're very similar in that way. It's that, maybe we're just extra hard-headed, but, we gladly pick up that torch, right?
Yeah,
And
indeed,
carry it.
indeed. It so important long before COVID and the tragedies of last year and the strife that we all are living through. How much representation matters, how much it's important for
Mhm.
people to see themselves in the roles and in the leaders that they too are or want to become. And
Mhm.
I, throughout my career, have been very conscious of that role, and how I show up in a room, how I show up in spaces, particularly where I'm the only one.
Right.
And that still happens to this day. We still have a long way to go. We've gone a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And
Mhm.
I think, like many people of color, I have this innate instinct when you walk into a space or a meeting or whatever situation you might be in, and you quickly have already scanned the room to figure
Absolutely.
out, where you sit with
Mhm.
respect to that. And for me, it's always led me to be even more unapologetic, to lean in,
Mhm.
and to do what God created me to be, which is to speak my mind, and what John Lewis has reminded us before, to
Mhm.
get up into some good and necessary trouble. So I think it's important to be that representation and and
Mhm.
understand that role as you are as a leader, because only may be lonely, but it also is extraordinarily powerful in the work
Mhm.
that we do. I also see some other questions coming in. And these go to some of the things that we've talked about before, Charlene. But Shannon Harris says, how do you navigate showing passion so that you're not to be perceived as so angry? And Alfred Ramirez, in that same way, has asked, how important is it to sort of rehearse comments to push back or undo harm that's continuously occurring? So how do you prepare for what may be expected in some of the comments that you get when you're the only, or you're a woman, or a man of color, or a woman of color? And how do you navigate that line between passion and not being perceived as angry?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in acting before something happens rather than being in a position to react to it. So if I'm in a conversation and I feel myself getting a little worked up, I'll just say, I know that you're probably thinking right now that I'm angry or that I'm worked up, but let me assure you, I'm not. Right. I feel strongly about this, but I'm not angry at it. So I try to take away whatever it is that I think that they're going to be thinking. Right. If I think it's, if I were in your shoes, I might think that this is a race issue, but I tell you, this isn't a race issue. This is an equity issue. Right. So I always try to jump ahead of what I think is going to happen. And, do I rehearse before I go in? Not so much anymore because it comes naturally, but I often will think of who do I want to channel when I walk into this room, right? If I'm not feeling confident in myself, who is it I'm going to channel when I go in this room so that I can do what I need to do, right? And whenever you're different, you're the only whatever it is. Self-awareness is really important, but you can't let what other people think hold you back. You just cannot let what other people think hold you back. And I'll tell you, I have there's a young woman who I just admire her so much, and she's in the communications field. And when she took a new job that she thought was a stretch for her, she created her own personal board of directors. And she sent me a note, as well as other people, 5 or 6 other people, and asked if we would be a part of her board of directors, and that this is why she was asking each of us. And on a quarterly basis, she doesn't pull us together, but on a quarterly basis, I have about a 45 to an hour minute conversation with her that's very structured, and I'm able to really help her when she says, well, this is how I reacted in this moment. And I'll say, well, next time I want you to try this. Right. So it's constant guidance. It's constant reaching out. But when you feel, we know when we're in a conversation and the other person is pulling away, and often we know why. And so I'll just say, am I losing you in this conversation? What do I need to talk with you about so that you better understand what it is that I mean? I just put it out there, and I tell you, I'm just going to go back for a minute for being the only, and being willing to be outspoken, which has, I think from the time I was 17 wasn't a problem for me anymore. But, I spent so many years adapting to what I call the system. And even though I was outspoken and I wanted to put things on the table that people weren't willing to put on the table. But when I was diagnosed with cancer and was out for a while and I came back to work, I had a whole different view of my own behavior and my own responsibility. And I just took on an even bigger and greater purpose to say what needed to be done, right? And to say, I know, company, we're doing this, but that is so performative. And by the way, while you all are talking about diversity, why is it that we have 10 white men in the room trying to decide what's the best thing for Black people? In what world does that make sense? So I don't know. There's some of us, we just have to be willing to put ourselves out there. But if we don't think we can take that risk, ask questions, right? When you think something's getting away from you, whomever you're talking to, ask questions, right? So you can modulate where they are.
Indeed. Keep asking questions. And I love the idea of having your own personal boards. And I think in many ways, many of us sort of do, but don't know that is the case. And I think the important lesson there among just convening a group of trusted leaders and individuals in your life is to not get hung up on the name. You're a mentor, you're a sponsor,
Mhm.
you're a champion, and focus on the individual and the value that
Absolutely.
they're creating for
Mhm.
you in your life. There is a proverb in the good book that talks about, if you surround yourself with wise people, you too will become wise. If you surround
Absolutely.
yourself with people who are fools, you too will become a fool. I'm loosely quoting here, and that is true in throughout our life. And having that group of individuals that can help not tell you what you need to hear, but what you have to hear, and push you
Mhm.
to be who you are and not who they want you to be, is critical. It reminds me, Charlene, of what Tracy Ellis Ross said. The Another phenomenal great act. She says, "It was when I realized I needed to stop trying to be someone else and
Right.
be myself that I actually
Mhm.
started to," and quoting her here, "to own, accept, and love what I had." And
Mhm.
that is whether you are at any point in your career going through the challenges, particularly as a person of color, is to not be who they want you to be, but to be who you are, and to have in you, as we've said before, to live the best that it is in us, and to know that it's going to be uncomfortable. What I've called walking around with a pebble in your shoe. People of
Right.
color walk around with the pebble in our shoes all
Mhm.
the time. And some of
Right.
us, it's very large. It's uncomfortable and it feels a little bit uneasy, but guess what? You can do it. And that's what we are. And that's how I would, and Charlene and others, continue to encourage you.
Mhm.
Life is walking around with the pebble in your shoe, especially if you're a person of color and in the professional and corporate world. So thank you very much for sharing that, Charlene.
Mhm.
I see more questions are coming in through the chat. Thank you very much. Continue to send them, and we'll get to them as
Mhm.
many as we can
Great.
as we move forward. Charlene, you and I have talked about the importance of introspection,
Ah.
and in our careers, and so I want to take a few minutes to talk about why it's important to pause, particularly
Mhm.
as professionals or people of color, and reflect amidst the different phases of our career journey. Why is that so important, you think? And
Mhm.
also, along your journey, did you ever wonder what would happen if you had taken a different route or different course in your career
Mhm.
based on what, some of the comments and some of the glass ceilings and the brick walls that you faced if you
Mhm.
decided to make a different decision?
Sure. So, let me talk about introspection first. You know, um, I have this saying that I share with people that, when you're a C-suite executive, just because you have a seat at the table doesn't mean that people are comfortable with you being there. And you have to remember that and think about that, because that's where your moment of introspection comes in. Is is this person comfortable with me being in their space? And how can I make them more comfortable? And does it stink that I have to be worried about making them more comfortable? Yes. And does that need to change? Absolutely. But is that the way it is today? Yes. So therefore, you need to know how to work within that, right? You've got to, while pushing for change, you still have to accept the reality that you're in. So I always take a moment, and I believe that when people push back on something, that whatever reason it is they're showing you that they're pushing back is not the reason they're doing it. There's something underneath that, and I always try to get to what's underneath it. And in some cases, it's been this person is afraid. In other cases, it's been this person has never taken direction from a Black woman ever, and they don't know what to do. They don't know what to make of this. So I think the introspection and putting yourself in someone else's shoes, which we've all heard, is always valuable and very helpful, because we do have to modulate our behavior, right? And we know, because we know when we walk in a room that people are going to have some preconceived notions, right? And so we have to be aware of that, and we have to be able to take a step back of the space that we're in. And it's just like anything else. And I think with women, we do this with our safety all the time, which is we walk into an unfamiliar place and you scan the room. You scan the room immediately for anything that can be dangerous. And we have to do the same thing in life and in work as well. So I think introspection is important. And I'm sorry, Licy, remind me of the second part of your
Well,
question.
and as you've been thinking about that and experiencing that throughout your career, have you ever wondered
Oh,
what would have happened if you chose a different path based on that feedback and those experiences that you had? That is, if you didn't persevere and have that resilience that you talked about a few moments ago, and didn't necessarily have that support system of a mentor or a champion or
mhm,
that circle around you, that can help push you, as
mhm,
Nicole York has said, to the next level. Um,
mhm,
do you wonder what would have happened? And would you have done anything differently in the
mhm,
decisions that you did make?
mhm. Gosh. I think that if I hadn't done all of those things, that absolutely nothing would have happened. I would have been in a dead end job for 20 years, wondering why people who I think I'm smarter than are being elevated above me. Right. And I feel pretty confident in that, because I've always been, too young, too girly, too this, too that, whatever. And so you just have to push ahead and let the noise go. Um, y- you know, my entire career has been in companies that are male dominated, traditional, and primarily all white. And people ask me all the time, why in the world did you go through all that? Right? It could have been at least a little bit easier. And my response has always been the same, is that yes, it would have been easier, but nothing would have changed. If I walked out the door because it got hard, then they'd say, oh, we tried that experiment. Now let's go replace her with a white male. Right. And so I just always felt that it was my job to stay and to push through. But I knew it was time to go in any case, is when the company's behavior or the leadership team or whoever, when their behavior started making me question who I am or my own competency or my belief in myself, that's when you know it's time to leave. Because once that's happened, once you are questioning your own capability and your own competence that's been put on you by someone else, then you've already lost. And the only one paying the price is you. So you have to go. But if that's not happening and it's just uncomfortable, I'm digging in my heels and I'm staying, because I want there to be more people that follows after me. And so I never really thought about taking another path. I really didn't, because it sounds kind of kitschy, I guess, but it's like my purpose has always been greater than my fear. And that has only increased with age.
Indeed. And I think perhaps also what I hear you say, which is an important lesson for all of us, and one that I've always tried to live by, like you, is that let's not regret the risks that didn't work,
Mhm,
and that didn't work out. Then then the chances of, if we didn't take that chance at all,
mhm,
to take that risk. And so, as you said, life, especially as a person of color working through corporate America and in the workplace, is full of risks at different periods of times. And it's true, as we've been saying here, by the very nature of the conversation, that we experience the workplace in a different way
mhm,
than others. I once had a conversation with a supervisor who was white, and I said to him, do you understand that you and I experience this workplace in a different way, right? That I
mhm.
come and bring myself in a certain way and engage in the workplace in a different, distinct way than necessarily
Right.
than you. And what do I mean
Mhm,
by that? I mean, I've often talked about sort of the luggage that we as people of color carry within the workplace, for ourselves, for others, right? The
mhm,
experiences that we go through, and how different people in different ways experience that in the workplace, that we're not all uniformly engaging in that way here
mhm,
moving forward. And so introspection as you've talked about, is so important to understand sort of where you stand, where you see yourself in that workplace vis-a-vis others, and the role that you play depending on where you are, to help and support others, to be that
Right.
circle of support,
Mhm.
and move through all of this. There's a question that's come through that I know you and I have faced. It's in this part of the conversation about, when we've gone through this journey of the introspection, and when we've realized, you know what, the conversation that I think we're having is not the conversation that we're actually having. Right?
Mhm.
There's two different conversations going on here, and a question from the audience is, how have you experienced that? How have you dealt with that when you realize this isn't really about what is the above the fold topic? This is about something
Mhm.
else, but it's being
Mhm.
masked. How do you deal with that?
I put it on the table. That's how I deal with it. It's like, okay, you're not experiencing this the same way that I am. And I'll tell you I don't want to get political, but I had this experience when we had when the insurrection took place in January. And as I watched it, I had tears running down my face. And I'm talking to someone who's white, and they are beside themselves about the attack on our democracy. And I thought, and we're having this conversation, and I said, huh, that's not what I'm talking about at all. That's not why I'm upset. And that's not why I'm crying. And they said, well, what are you talking about? I said, I'm crying because I know that as a Black person, if I had tried that, I would be dead. I don't have the privilege to do what they're doing. And oh, by the way, in my viewpoint, they're doing that to protect a privilege that they don't want me to have. And so it was having this conversation where I said to this individual, I said, I'm trying to see this from your perspective, but I really need you to see this from mine as well. Right. So let's teach each other. Right. And sometimes, when it's at work, you can't get that personal, and you just need to take a pause, and you just say, you know what? I need to take a pause. I need to think about what you're saying. Let's pick this up tomorrow. Right. Or let's pick this up at another time. But don't go in circles, because when you go in circles, you end up circling the drain. Right.
Right.
And I have two adult daughters, and I tell them all the time to remember, every day you are teaching people how to treat you, every single day. So don't let anything go by. If somebody calls you by the wrong name, don't say, "Oh, I'll correct it the next time." You stop in your tracks and you let them know your name, right? Because every day we are teaching people how to treat us.
It's the same powerful advice that I give to my two boys, as well. That live life courageously, but also live it smartly. In as we move through this, so much of what we talk about, of course, Charlene, especially during this time of pandemic and stress and COVID and well-being and so on. Olivia Ingram asks, how do you take care of yourself and your mental health and well-being when you're going through ostensibly what we've talked about here today,
Mhm.
all of the challenges of moving from invisible to visible, to breaking through the glass ceilings and figuring out how to then tackle the concrete wall in
Mhm.
front of you. How do you climb, as we've been saying here, in a new way, and do that with your mental health and well-being intact? How do you do that?
Well, first off, I encourage people to be more selfish. And what I mean by that is, take the time to take care of yourself, right? And put yourself first when you can. And, I'm full of all of these silly sayings. And one of them I say often is, a dead battery can't jump a dead battery, right? So you have to take care of yourself to live and to fight and to be another day. And quite frankly, I've experienced what happens when you don't take care of yourself. And when your body betrays you and when your body breaks down, and it's horrible. It's awful and it's horrible. And there's so many times that I have said to myself, I just wish I had taken the time I needed to get in a better space in my mind. Or God forbid, I wish I had not felt that I had to fly to Australia instead of taking care of my health, right? I can put that doctor's appointment off one more time, so I really think people, and especially women, I think we need to be a little more selfish.
Indeed. And I also would add that in this time of unprecedented stress on us professionally and personally, it's important, as I know we here at APCO do, is focus on compassion, focus on human connection, focus on understanding what one another are going through during this time, and understand that we all are experiencing what we're living out loud in different ways, and that it's always important to make sure that we are tuning in order to better turn outward in the work that we do and the relationships that we have. Charlene, throughout our conversation, we have been essentially talking about the title of your book, right? You are enough. And Millie asked earlier on in the conversation, question from the audience, what's the inspiration for the book? What should we expect? Tell us a little bit about this amazing description and writing that you are going to share with us here soon.
So the full name of the book is You Are Enough: Reclaiming Your Career and Your Life with Purpose, Passion, and Unapologetic Authenticity. And I wrote the book. I didn't know I was going to write a book, quite frankly. I left the corporate world not to write a book, but to do something. And it came to me that I needed to write a book. And I needed to write a book for two reasons. One, because I had learned so much from what I call lessons from being invisible in the workplace, and how to climb that corporate ladder, and what strategies worked and which ones didn't. And I felt that I needed to tell people about that. I couldn't just keep that to myself, because if I could make someone's journey shorter, easier, or a bit less lonely, then I felt like I needed to do that. And then on the cancer side, to be quite honest, when I finished my cancer treatment and I came out of it, I was lost. I had no idea who I was anymore. And I look in the mirror and I didn't know the woman looking back at me. I didn't know who she was. And it was a 7-month treatment that turned into a near 4-year treatment. And I had a complete loss of identity, and I had to find my way back to myself. And I had to figure out who I was. And in the process of doing that, I discovered how much I had given up in working so hard to be successful. And so it's a business book, it's a memoir, it's a cautionary tale, and it's a story of challenge and triumph. So I'm so excited about this book. It's so personal. I share, very real stories of what's happened to me in the workplace, although I don't out anybody or any company. And I think it's just, we're so often told that we're not enough. And I just want people to know you are enough. You are exactly who you need to be. And the problem is not with you, people, we're always working so hard to make sure to get people to like us, and I understand we all want to be liked, but let's be realistic. We don't even like everybody, right? So why are we trying to get everybody to like us?
Yes.
And I was just going to share real quickly just one piece that's in the book that I'm going to read, and it's short. And this really ties into not just what we're talking about today, but a number of the sessions yesterday that were about value and knowing your value. And so this is something from the book. It's a parable. I did not write it. I came across it. And it made sense to me to put in my book. And, I said, I want to close this chapter by sharing a parable. And while I haven't been able to confirm the author, I include it here because it reminds us that regardless of the challenges women and minorities experience in the workplace, one of the most effective antidotes is knowing our value and being true to it. So here it is. Before she died, a mother said to her daughter, "Here is a watch that your grandfather gave me. It's almost 200 years old. Before I give it to you, go to the jewelry store downtown. Tell them that I want to sell it and see how much they offer you." The daughter went to the jewelry store, came back to her mother and said, "They offered $150 because it's so old." The mother then said, "Go to the pawn shop." The daughter went to the pawn shop, came back to her mother and said, "The pawn shop offered $10 because it looks so worn." The mother asked her daughter to go to the museum and show them the watch. She went to the museum, came back, and said to her mother, "The curator offered $500,000 for this very rare piece to be included in their precious antiques collections." The mother said, "I wanted to let you know that the right place values you in the right way. Don't find yourself in the wrong place and get angry if you are not valued. Those that know your value are those who appreciate you. Don't stay in a place where nobody sees your value."
Know your value and be true to it. Thank you very much, Charlene. Thank you for everyone who tuned in to our conversation around this kitchen table today. And thank you to PowerToFly and all of the amazing speakers who have come through and will continue to come through this week. We thank you for this amazing moment to celebrate and elevate Black women, and for the conversations that are taking place around kitchen tables across this summit. Tune in. Thank you very much, Charlene. Wonderful as you always are. Thank you. Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much, Charlene. We do have people in the chat asking where they can get a copy of your book. So if you want to send the link over to us, I'm more than happy to share that with everybody in the chat on the website.
Great, fantastic.
Thank you so much. It was an amazing chat. It was really great to hear from both you and Licy. So thank you so much for spending time with us this morning.
My pleasure. My pleasure.